Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really tearing into something huge, something that shapes, well, almost everything around us. We're looking at the industrial food system.
Yeah, it's more than just what's on your plate. We're talking about the science behind the cravings, the marketing, the politics. It's a massive structure.
Exactly. And we're doing this because you, listening right now, you want the real story, the quick path to understanding the system that honestly kind of runs our lives.
It really does. And when you dig into the sources, you see just how revolutionary this whole fast food, processed food thing has been for America. It's changed landscapes, economies, jobs.
In our culture, right?
Absolutely. Deeply embedded in pop culture.
And the scale. I mean, the numbers are just wild. Think about this. On any given day, about a quarter of all adults in the U.S. hit up a fast food place.
A quarter. So it's not just a treat. It's like daily life for millions.
Yeah.
It's become the baseline.
Normal. And that leads us to the big questions we need to tackle. How is this food, which should just be nourishment, engineered to be so, well, irresistible, so craveable?
And how are kids, the most vulnerable group, targeted specifically? Plus, the political muscle behind it all. How this whole system protects itself, even expands.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's start with the science, the lab stuff, the industrial alchemy, as they call it. How do they make cheap stuff taste addictive?
Well, the core recipe is surprisingly basic, but incredibly effective. It really boils down to three things: salt, sugar, and fat. SSF, that's the industry shorthand.
Salt, sugar, fat, the big three.
Yep, those are the main tools. The big food companies wield these to dial in their products for maximum appeal. The goal isn't just taste, it's hitting that point that basically guarantees you'll eat too much.
And when you say dial in, this isn't like a chef adding a pinch of salt, right? This is serious science.
Oh, absolutely. High-level math, psychology, neuroscience, they're all laser-focused on finding what the industry calls the Bliss Point.
The Bliss Point. Okay, what exactly is that?
It's a technical term. It refers to that precise amount of an ingredient, usually sugar, salt, or fat, that makes something taste absolutely delicious. But crucially, it also minimizes the signal that tells your brain, okay, you've had enough.
So it stops you from feeling full or satisfied?
Sort of. It pushes you right up to the edge of maximum enjoyment without crossing over into, ugh, that's too sweet or way too salty. You just keep eating.
Wow. So it's not just good taste, it's engineered compulsion, making it so good you can't stop, but not so intense that your body's defenses, kick in.
That's the essence of it.
Mm.
And the effort they put into finding this point,
Mm-hmm.
it's pretty extraordinary. Huge investments in labs, consultants.
We saw that amazing example with Dr. Pepper, didn't we? They weren't even trying to get new drinkers.
Exactly. It was purely about increasing volume, getting their existing fans, the loyal ones, to just buy more, drink more.
How did they approach that?
It's a perfect illustration. They brought in these specialists, people whose entire job is tweaking formulas for maximum craving. They ended up creating 61 slightly different versions of Dr. Pepper.
61. Just tiny variations.
Tiny variations in sugar, flavorings, acids, even the mouthfeel. Nothing left to chance, no guesswork involved.
That's a lot of versions. How on earth did they test them all?
Get this. They recruited thousands of tasters all over the country. Specific groups, existing fans, and they conducted a total of 3,904 individual taste tests.
Nearly 4,000 tastings.
Yep. All that effort, all that money, all that math, just to find that one single formula, that Bliss Point that they calculated would lead to the most purchases. Think about that investment. It's all about engineering desire, not nutrition.
When you spend that kind of money just perfecting the craving, it makes you wonder. What are they maybe covering up with that flavor? Are they distracting us from, the cheapness of the actual ingredients?
That's absolutely the crux of it. The engineered Bliss Point lets them use lower quality base ingredients. We'll get more into that. But first, there's a really serious ethical dimension here, especially with kids.
Right. How does this affect different people, particularly children?
Well, the science seems to show this industrial approach is basically creating, or at least amplifying, a taste for really extreme flavors.
And there's actual research on this, isn't there, that Monell Center study?
Yeah, the Monell Chemical Senses Center study was groundbreaking. It gave the first real scientific backing to what the industry kind of already knew or suspected. Kids really, really like intense sweet and salty tastes.
More than adults.
Significantly more. The study found that twice as many kids compared to adults picked the solutions with the absolute highest levels of sugar and salt offered. It's not a subtle difference. It's a huge preference for the extremes.
And didn't that study also find something about different demographics, a racial component?
It did, and that's a really crucial point. They specifically found that African Americans, particularly black teenagers, showed the strongest preference for those super high concentrations of salt and the sweetest options.
So this intense preference isn't evenly spread. It hits certain vulnerable groups harder?
Yeah.
That raises huge public health questions.
Huge red flags, yeah. And it leads right into that chicken and egg problem that scientists were already worried about back in the 70s. Was this craving for intense sugar, for instance, actually innate?
Or is it something learned? I remember the Monell scientist Lawrence Green raising that exact concern.
He suggested it's probably a learned behavior. Think about it. If kids are constantly bombarded from a very young age with processed foods packed with way more sugar than you'd ever find naturally, their taste buds are basically being trained.
Trained to demand those high levels.
Exactly. So the food industry isn't just meeting a natural preference. It's actively creating and shaping that preference in young consumers, teaching them to crave unnatural levels of SSF levels that definitely don't line up with good nutrition. It's manufactured desire.
Right.
And once you've trained that palate, train people to crave those intense engineered flavors, something else becomes possible.
What's that?
You can completely disconnect flavor from the actual quality of the ingredients. If you can achieve that bliss point with big hits of salt, sugar, fat, and maybe some chemical flavorings, well, you don't need expensive, high-quality whole ingredients anymore.
So the focus shifts away from quality.
Entirely to cost efficiency, to using the absolute cheapest raw materials, the cheapest commodities you can find.
It just becomes about the numbers then.
Right.
The nutritional value, the natural taste, even the texture, it all gets pushed aside for the sake of the price tag.
Completely subordinated to the cost matrix.
Yeah.
And this leads to some really clever, maybe deceptive marketing, even for something as basic as milk.
Right, the whole 2% milk thing. That's a classic example.
Textbook case from the 60s. People were getting worried about fat because of heart disease links.
Right.
Whole milk sales were dropping. The dairy industry needed a way to reassure people without actually changing the product much.
So instead of making truly low-fat milk, they just labeled it differently.
Exactly. They came up with 2%. Now think about how that sounds to the average person. You hear 2% fat, you immediately think.
Wow, they took out 98% of the fat. Assuming whole milk must be loaded with it.
But it's not. Whole milk is only about 3% fat by weight to begin with.
So 2% milk is barely different from whole milk in terms of fat.
Minimal difference. Hardly a reduction at all. But that label, it worked like magic. Consumers felt like they were making a really healthy choice. It quickly became the most popular type, outselling both whole milk and actual skim milk.
Didn't consumer groups complain that was misleading?
They tried, yeah. But they failed. The label stuck. It just shows how powerful framing is, even when the actual product difference is tiny. They played on the fear of fat without really delivering a lower fat product.
It's amazing. And if you want to see this cost-first thinking taken to its absolute extreme, you just have to look at how Lunchables were developed. Oscar Mayer, Kraft. That product is like a masterclass in ruthless cost-cutting.
Oh, the Lunchables story is fascinating and kind of brutal. The internal documents show how literally every single decision, the ingredients, the taste, even the shape of the food came second to shaving pennies, sometimes just 1 penny off the production cost.
So they wanted the basic kid combo, meat, crackers, cheese, but real ingredients cause problems.
Right away, like natural cheddar cheese, great taste, but it crumbles. It doesn't stack neatly, doesn't work well with high-speed packaging machines. So, boom, step 1. Switch to processed cheese. It bends, it stacks, it lasts forever. Quality out, utility in.
Okay, so processed cheese it is, but then they started looking at the shape. This is where it gets really granular, doesn't it?
It really does. So they actually tested cheese shapes with kids. Little round slices of cheese scored an 80 out of 100 for likability. Square slices scored 70.
So rounds were clearly better liked, by 10 points. More fun, probably tasted better in their minds. Which did they choose?
Squares.
Of course, why?
Because square cheese is way easier and cheaper to cut and handle in a fully automated, high-volume factory. That production efficiency, that tiny cost saving, was valued more than a 10-point jump in kid preference.
Wow. Likability loses to production ease. But it didn't even stop there, did it? They considered going even cheaper on the cheese.
Yeah, this really shows the obsession. Even after settling on the cheaper processed square cheese, they seriously debated swapping the standard Kraft processed cheese for something called cheese food.
Cheese food, that sounds less appealing.
It tested poorly. Kids didn't like the taste as much. It was seen as lower quality,
Well,
but
let me guess. It was cheaper.
it would save them 2 cents per
Lunchable.
2 pennies.
2 cents was enough reason to consider knowingly making the product taste worse to kids. That really says it all about the priorities.
It's just, yeah. What's fascinating here is how every single aspect of the food, its shape, its ingredients, its quality, it's all just plugged into this formula, this matrix, where the only goal is shrinking the cost. It's not designed for taste or nutrition or enjoyment. It's engineered for shelf life and, above all, profit. High tag YV, targeting the youth consumer and public health outcomes.
So, when you have this intense focus on engineering craving and cutting costs down to the penny, it naturally leads to really aggressive marketing, doesn't it? Especially towards kids.
Absolutely. Kids aren't just seen as customers for today. They're the pipeline for tomorrow. They're viewed as essential, long-term loyal consumers. You hook them early, you potentially have them for life.
And the companies themselves basically admit they're looking for more than just a sale. They want an emotional connection, like that Frosted Mini Wheats example.
Right. Frosted Mini Wheats was a solid brand, but it kind of hit a wall when everyone else started shouting about whole grains and fiber. Rivals were gaining ground just by talking health, even without giant ad budgets.
So Kellogg's couldn't just rely on the product itself, which, by the way, had a fair bit of sugar, right? Like 2 teaspoons per cup.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly a health food. Their marketing team realized they needed something more powerful than just nutritional claims. They couldn't really win that fight.
So what did they do?
They decided the brand, quote, needed an insight that ran deeper than basic nutrition and into the hearts of consumers. Forget the health angle. Go for the emotional connection. Try to weave the brand into the fabric of childhood using mascots, ads, toys. Make it part of their identity. Aim for that lifelong loyalty.
Okay, so you combine this engineered food designed for maximum craving with really sophisticated marketing aimed directly at kids' emotions. The ethical implications just explode, don't they? This whole thrown away food culture, as the sources call it.
Explode is right. The stakes are incredibly high. Life and death, potentially. The source material points to something truly devastating. Today's kids are actually facing the statistical hand of a shorter life expectancy than their parents.
A shorter life expectancy. That reverses decades, centuries of progress.
And here's the kicker. The analysis identifies this industrial food culture as the sole reason for this shocking potential reversal.
Wait, the sole reason, not just a contributing factor, but the only one. That's almost unbelievable. It implicates everything. Obesity, diabetes, sure, but also just the general lack of nutrients, the whole convenience trap.
It really speaks to how systemic and pervasive the problem is. When you train kids from infancy to crave these intense SSF levels, and then you hammer that message home with marketing that bypasses rational thought, well, the long-term health damage is almost inevitable.
Surely inside the industry they know this. They must recognize the damage being done. Is there any internal discussion about the ethics?
There is some, yes. You see mentions in industry documents of creating, like, a code to guide the nutritional aspects of food marketing, especially to children. So they clearly understand the problem exists.
But does it lead to real change?
Rarely anything substantial. Because the fundamental driver, the need for profit based on cheap, processed ingredients, pushes relentlessly against any reforms that would actually cost money or limit marketing freedom. The structure rewards the current behavior.
And one really sad outcome of this whole system, this drive for standardization and profit, is how it's wiped out so much diversity in our food landscape. All those local diners, the mom and pop places, the regional food.
Gone.
Right.
Replaced by a handful of massive multinational chains. It's created this fast food monoculture. There was this study by an MIT nutritionist.
The one near Tucson.
That's the one. They surveyed 26 fast food places along just a 5-mile stretch of road. 26 different brands, different logos, different color schemes.
But underneath the branding,
The menus were depressingly similar. Almost identical, really.
what was on offer in this monoculture?
Pancakes, donuts, fried chicken, burgers, hot dogs, fries, sodas. You know the drill. The report was scathing about the nutritional consequences. Extremely high in fat and salt, severely lacking in variety and basic nutrients.
And what was missing? What couldn't you find in any of those 26 places?
Simple, basic, healthy stuff. No carrots, no chopped liver.
Hmm.
Okay, maybe not everyone wants that, but still. No whole wheat bread, no vegetable soup, no baked potatoes, no yogurt, no skim milk, no bananas, no broccoli, nothing like that.
So you're surrounded by choice, dozens of options, but nutritionally, you're actually starved for real variety. Variety of brand, maybe, but not substance.
Precisely. It's an illusion of choice that masks a deep nutritional deficit. Hashtag tag V. the system of production and regulatory barriers. And, to really grasp why the food ends up like this, the burgers, the nuggets, you have to look behind the counter, behind the marketing, to where the raw ingredients come from. We've talked about industrial animal farming.
You mean the CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations.
Exactly. The descriptions of these places in the source material are, well, they're harsh. They really challenge our ideas about farming, about animals, even about capitalism itself.
One writer called them a nightmarish glimpse of what capitalism can look like in the absence of moral or regulatory constraint. That's pretty strong language.
It reflects the reality described. In that system, an animal isn't really seen as a living being anymore. It's redefined purely in economic terms. Its life becomes protein production.
And it's suffering.
That just becomes an economic variable called stress, something to be managed with drugs or system changes to minimize impact on the bottom line. This intense, factory-like industrialization of living creatures is, historically speaking, very new, and it's driven entirely by the demand for cheap inputs for the fast food chains.
And the key metric driving this whole industrial machine is efficiency, right? Specifically, how efficiently animals convert feed into body weight.
That's the absolute core metric, protein conversion efficiency, because feed is a major cost, and the differences between animals are huge.
How huge?
Okay, so cattle, steers, they need about 7 pounds of grain to gain 1 pound of weight. 7 to 1. Pork is better, about 3.5 pounds of grain per pound of gain.
And chickens, they're famously efficient.
The most efficient by far. Poultry needs just over 2 pounds of grain for a pound of weight gain. 2 to 1. The cost difference is massive.
And that explains the huge shift we've seen globally, away from beef towards chicken and pork.
Absolutely. Over the last 50 years, chicken and pork consumption has exploded worldwide, largely displacing beef and veal, which used to be more common, often raised on smaller mixed farms. The industrial system favors the most efficient converters.
But packing animals together like that, processing them at incredible speeds, it creates huge risks, doesn't it? Contamination, disease.
Massive risks. And the industry's track record when it comes to managing those risks and accepting oversight, well, it's not great. They've consistently fought against public health measures.
Like with meat inspection back in the 80s.
Yeah, that's a key example. Slaughter line speeds were increasing, raising the risk of contamination. But the meatpacking industry actively lobbied against using modern microbial testing, actual scientific tests in the federal inspection programs. They fought successfully to block it.
So instead of testing for bacteria like E. coli, what were inspectors supposed to do?
They were stuck using these incredibly outdated methods.
Yeah.
Basically, just looking at the meat and smelling it. The poke and sniff method, they called it, hopelessly inadequate for detecting microscopic pathogens.
And we saw the tragic results of that neglect with the Jack-in-the-Box E. coli outbreak in 1993. Kids died. How did the industry react then? Did they finally accept testing?
Their first move wasn't acceptance, it was blame shifting. A very calculated campaign to divert attention away from the contaminated raw meat itself, the source of the problem within their plants.
So who did they blame?
They blamed the restaurants and consumers. They argued the real problem was inconsistent information about proper cooking temperatures for hamburger. Basically saying it was the cook's fault, or the customer's fault, for not cooking it well enough.
Making individual error the fall guy for a systemic failure in the supply chain.
Exactly. It was a cynical but effective strategy to deflect calls for mandatory testing and stricter regulations on the processing plants themselves. Protect the system, blame the end user.
And this reliance on industrial methods on chemicals, it's not just meat, is it? It applies to produce, too. That Florida tomato example was pretty shocking.
That number really jumps out at you. In 2006 alone, tomato farmers in Florida used nearly 8 million pounds of pesticides, insecticides, fungicides, herbicides on their crops.
8 million pounds just in Florida, just on tomatoes. How does that compare to other places?
Get this. It was 8 times the amount of the same chemicals used on a similar area of fresh tomato crops in California that year. 8 times more chemical input.
Why the huge difference?
It points to the intense pressure in that part of the industrial system to produce massive quantities of perfectly uniform-looking tomatoes year-round, regardless of the environmental cost or the chemical load passed on to consumers. Like the factory-farmed meat, the industrial tomato is the product of a system obsessed with control and efficiency over anything else. #TagJag9CT. Corporate political power and policy control.
Okay, so we have a system that produces food engineered for craving, uses cheap ingredients, targets kids, creates massive health risks, and relies on intense chemical inputs. How does a system like that not only survive but actually thrive and grow?
Well, the only way it can is through immense political power, corporate political power. And this isn't just about lobbying for specific favors. It's about shaping the entire conversation, shaping government policy, shaping the very advice citizens get about what to eat.
Like how they handled the whole eat less fat message back in the 70s.
That's a perfect example. The scientific consensus was building less fat could prevent heart disease, maybe some cancers. A clear public health message seemed obvious.
But the food industry couldn't have the government telling people to eat less of their products. Fat was central to so many of them.
No way. So they mobilized, they pushed back hard, and they succeeded in getting a crucial rule established for all federal dietary guidelines.
What was the rule?
The guidelines had to be framed positively and permissively. No negative commands like eat less fat or avoid sugar. Instead, they pushed this very reasonable sounding but ultimately protective narrative.
The balance, variety, and moderation mantra.
That's the one. And the key phrase that became industry gospel. There is no such thing as a good or a bad food. All foods can be part of healthful diets.
Which sounds balanced, but what it really does is shield all foods, even the junkiest ones, from specific criticism.
Precisely. It neutered any potential government warning about high fat or high sugar foods. It allowed the industry to keep making and marketing those products without facing direct official condemnation. They won by controlling the language, defining nutrition as this vague game of personal balance.
And this political muscle gets flexed directly against kids' health, too, right? In places you wouldn't expect, like schools, the vending machine fight.
Oh yeah, that was a direct confrontation. A bill gets proposed to ban sodas and other competitive foods from schools during lunchtime. Purely a nutritional measure aimed at improving kids' diets. Who fights it?
Coca-Cola, I imagine.
Coca-Cola leads the charge. But how they fought it is revealing.
What did they do?
They didn't try to argue that soda was healthy. Instead, they organized a massive letter-writing campaign from the people who stood to lose money. School principals, district superintendents, even coaches.
The schools themselves, why would they oppose it?
Because they were afraid of losing the revenue those vending machines generated for their budgets, for sports programs, whatever. They wrote to legislators expressing that fear.
So the money from the soda machines became more important than the nutritional health of the students in the building, even for the school administrators.
It shows you where the power dynamic really lies in that situation. The corporate interest, channeled through the school's financial dependence, effectively overruled the public health goal.
That's disheartening, but to really understand the sheer scale of corporate power, how it can influence not just domestic policy but foreign policy, even overthrow governments, we have to look at that historical example, United Fruit Company in Guatemala.
It's a chilling story, and it's absolutely relevant. It shows the lengths a powerful food corporation will go to protect its assets. In the 1950s, Guatemala had a democratically elected president, Jacobo Arbenz.
And Arbenz started land reform, right, which threatened USC's massive, mostly unused land holdings.
Exactly. He planned to expropriate hundreds of thousands of acres of UFC land, paying them for it, mind you, based on their own declared tax value, and give it to landless peasants. UFC was the largest landowner and employer in Guatemala. They weren't having it.
So what did UFC do? They couldn't just complain.
They launched a huge, sophisticated propaganda campaign inside the United States. They hired high-powered lobbyists, PR firms, flew influential journalists down to Guatemala on carefully managed tours.
All to paint Arbenz not as a reformer, but as what?
As a dangerous communist, a Soviet puppet, a threat to American interests. They fed this narrative relentlessly to the U.S. press. Big names like Time, Newsweek effectively manufacturing a Cold War crisis where the real issue was corporate land ownership.
And this campaign reached the highest levels of the U.S. government.
Critically, yes. The Secretary of State at the time was John Foster Dulles. His brother, Alan Dulles, was the director of the CIA. Both had deep ties to UFC through their old law firm.
So the guys in charge of U.S. foreign policy and intelligence had a direct connection to the company being threatened.
A massive conflict of interest.
I know.
And they orchestrated a CIA coup that overthrew Arbenz in 1954. Their stated goal internally was to install a government compatible with United Fruit.
How did they justify this intervention publicly? They couldn't just say it was for UFC.
No, they needed a pretext. They found one when a small shipment of weapons arrived in Guatemala from Czechoslovakia. Secretary Dulles seized on this, calling it proof of a Soviet conspiracy, a threat to the hemisphere.
So he used the political fear of communism
to provide cover for action taken primarily for the economic benefit of a single U.S. corporation. It denied the accusation that he was just acting for United Fruit while achieving exactly what United Fruit wanted.
It's a stark lesson. Corporate power can literally redefine national security, shape media narratives, and use the government itself as a tool to protect its bottom line, even overseas.
It shows the immense power these entities can wield when their core economic interests are challenged.
So wrapping this all up, this deep dive, it really paints a picture, doesn't it? The fast food, the processed snacks on the shelves, they aren't just random products. They're the deliberate result of a huge industrial system.
A system built on engineered craving, driven relentlessly by cost-cutting, protected by serious political muscle, and prioritizing efficiency over almost everything else: nutrition, health, even basic integrity sometimes.
And understanding that structure, that system, it kind of makes you question this idea we always hear about consumer sovereignty, right? The idea that we, the consumers, are in charge because we choose what to buy.
Yeah, that phrase consumer sovereignty,
It,
it feels a bit hollow when you look at this system. How sovereign are you, really, when the choices are so heavily engineered, marketed, and constrained? When the most readily available, cheapest options are often the least healthy? Are you truly sovereign if walking away from the deal is incredibly difficult or costly?
the sources we looked at suggest a different kind of sovereignty might be the real alternative. Not consumer sovereignty, but producer and household sovereignty.
Exactly. It's about shifting the focus back, away from just being a passive consumer choosing between brand X and brand Y, and towards having more control over producing food, or at least preparing it. Think smaller scale.
Like backyard gardens, community farms, just cooking more at home.
Yes, reclaiming some control over the process. Historically, food decisions were often more local, more focused on community health and sustainability, not just maximizing quarterly profits and engineering bliss points.
It's about taking some power back from that centralized industrial machine, bringing it closer to home, to the individual, the family, the community.
Right. So maybe the final thought we leave you with, something to really chew on after all this, comes from reflecting on the sheer scale and power of this system we've described.
What's the thought?
Consider this. What if every household that could possibly afford to eat better food actually started growing some of its own? Even just a little bit. A few pots on a balcony, a small patch in the yard. What if people rediscovered their kitchens, learned or relearned the skills of cooking, preserving, preparing real food?
It sounds simple, almost quaint.
It sounds simple, but think about the collective impact. It would start to shift the balance, return things to a more, well, normal state. And those simple acts, growing a garden, cooking from scratch, they might seem harmless. But as one source put it, they are, quote, not dangerous ideas. Unless you're the CEO of an industrial food system, then they are downright subversive.
Growing your own food as a subversive act? Something to think about.